places you don't talk about at parties. You want me on that wall. You need me on that wall.
Keep that frequency clear.
And now it's conspiracy. See, they've made that something that should not be even entertained for a minute. That powerful people might get together and have a plan. Doesn't happen. You're a kook. You're a conspiracy buff.
You're watching The Truth is Viral, the only news program on the internet trusted to deliver the truth since 2008. And now, here's your host, Mr. Bobby Powell.
Welcome back to The Truth is Viral. My name is Bob Powell, and I'm your host for this hour of the Anti-Marxist Marathon, exclusively here on the Liberty One Network. And I'm going to take you to school. My wife always said that I should have been a school teacher. Well, I'm going to take you to school, and I'm going to show you some of my research that shows that Barack Obama needs to be in prison yesterday. I've got an exclusive interview with a NATO spokesman, an official NATO spokesman, who told me that the reason that Obama gave to the world for intervening in Libya, that Moammar Gadaffi was about to use gas on innocent protesters, was an utter lie. This NATO spokesman tells me that NATO knew that Gaddafi had no chemical weapons. In fact, they'd been helping him dispose of them since 2003. So that's going to be the main focus of this hour, but we're also going to talk about the American form of government and how we got to this state that we're in today. We're going to talk about the Constitution, which limits the power of the federal government, because, you know, the founders knew that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's just a truism, is what they call it. It's something that's patently true. And we're going to talk about the more than a dozen high-ranking government officials that have been fired, demoted, or have scurried away from the FBI like rats leaving a sinking ship over this fake Trump-Russia collusion investigation being headed by the special counsel Robert Mueller. We're going to talk about good cops and bad cops and people that call themselves patriots who are anything but. So yeah, we're going to have a great, exciting hour. I hope you enjoy it. I'll try not to be too dry, but the information that I've got to share with you today is absolutely essential for you to know as we fight to keep our voices alive in a country where conservative voices are increasingly being silenced. Knowledge is power, my friends. And you're about to get some in this hour of The Truth is Viral. You know, a lot of people these days seem to think that we live in a democracy. Not true. We live in a constitutional republic. In a democracy, it's literally mob rule, where 51% can tell the other 49% what to do. But in a constitutional republic, the minority is protected from tyranny, the tyranny of the mob, by the rule of law. And it's important to understand the type of government that our founders wanted to give to us, because they were the most brilliant men to come out of the Enlightenment. And a lot of people have forgotten about this. And we are literally now fighting to keep our constitutional republic. Benjamin Franklin warned us that if we don't fight for it, it'll be taken away from us. You know, there's an old saying that you've got the ballot box and the soap box, and then you've got the cartridge box. If either of the first two boxes are taken away, if our voices are silenced, as they are being now by social media like Google and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, then that takes away options for peaceful change. And that's a real danger, a clear and present danger to the United States. So we need to be informed. Knowledge is power. That's unequivocally true. And in order to fight You need not just be armed with weapons. You need to be armed up here. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to know what the founders intended for us. And then use that knowledge to fight for it. If you don't, it will be taken away. Then we'll see some real suffering. So I'm going to present a little video that I found that's going to tell you in no uncertain terms and with great graphics. It's just a really great video. What the founders intended, what our form of government is like, and how other forms of government are basically tyranny. So enjoy this, and when we come back, I will share with you my exclusive interview with a NATO spokesman who told me that the reason that Barack Obama gave for American intervention in Libya was a lie. It's shocking. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and everybody else that had to do with Libya needs to be imprisoned yesterday. They spent our blood and our treasure on a lie. 3 dead brave American operators and a dead United States ambassador based on a lie. Also that Obama and Clinton could install a Muslim Brotherhood government in Libya and continue trafficking arms from Libya to Syria, where they were given to ISIS and Al-Qaeda terrorists. These people need to be in prison. You know, like I said, it's a truism that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we've seen 12 of our highest-ranking government officials in the Department of Justice and the FBI be fired, criminally referred, demoted, or they've just fled the ship like they fled the sinking ship like rats. And but their day's coming. They're all going to be held accountable. With Donald Trump as president, I can guarantee it. So this is going to be an exciting hour. Let's start it off with learning a little bit about the American form of government.
When Benjamin Franklin exited the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a woman, "Sir, what have you given us?" His immediate response was, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." Yet most Americans today have been persuaded that our nation's governmental system is a democracy and not a republic. The difference between these two is essential in understanding Americanism and the American system. Before we discuss political systems, however, it's helpful to address the confusion that has been spread about the political spectrum. Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having 0 power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States is. Those who advocate such a form of government are really constitutional moderates. So let's analyze the basic forms of government. They are monarchy or dictatorship ruled by one, oligarchy ruled by a few, democracy ruled by a majority, republic ruled by law, and anarchy, which is ruled by no one. In discussing these 5, we'll see that they can be narrowed down to even fewer. Looking first at monarchy or dictatorship, this form of government doesn't really exist in the practical sense. It's always a group that puts one of its members up front. A king has his council of nobles or earls, and every dictator has his bureaucrats or commissars, the men behind the scenes. This isn't ruled by one, even though one person may be the visible leader. It's ruled by a group. So let's eliminate monarchy, dictatorship, because it never truly exists. Oligarchy, which is ruled by a group, is the most common form of government in all history. and it is the most common form of government today. Most of the nations of the world are ruled by a powerful few, and therefore oligarchy remains. At the other end, we find anarchy, which means without government. Some people have looked over history and found that many of its worst crimes were committed by governments, so they decided that having no government might be a good idea. But this is a mistake, because as the ancient Greeks stated, without law there can be no freedom. Our founding fathers agreed and held that some amount of government is a necessary force in any civilized, orderly society. In a state of anarchy, however, everyone has to guard life, liberty, and property, and the lives of family members. Everyone must be armed, and movement is severely restricted because one's property has to be protected at all times. Civilized people have always hired someone to do the guarding, a sheriff, a police force, or some branch of government. Once law enforcement was in place, the people were freer. They could leave their property, work in the fields, and so on. In short, the proper amount of government makes everyone freer. There are some who advocate anarchy, however, not because they want no government, but because they don't like what they have. They use anarchy as a tool for revolutionary change. The condition of anarchy is very much like a vacuum where something rushes in to fill it. These calculating anarchists work to break down the existing government with rioting, killing, looting, and terrorism. Tragically, the people living in such chaos often go to those best able to put an end to it and beg them to take over and restore order. And who is best able to put an end to the chaos? The very people who started it. The anarchists who created the problem then create a government run by them, an oligarchy, where they have total power. This is exactly what happened in Russia that led to Lenin taking total power, and in Germany where Hitler's brown shirts created the chaos that brought him to power. But anarchy isn't a stable form of government. It's a quick transition from something that exists to something desired by the power-hungry. It's a temporary condition, and because it isn't permanent, we eliminate it as well. The word democracy comes from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratein, meaning to rule. Democracy, therefore, means the rule of the people, majority rule. This, of course, sounds good, but suppose the majority decides to take away one's home, or business, or children. Obviously, there has to be a limit. The flaw in democracy is that the majority isn't restrained. If more than half the people can be persuaded to want something in a democracy, they rule. What about republic? Well, that comes from the Latin, res meaning thing, and publica meaning public. It means the public thing, the law. A true republic is one where the government is limited by law, leaving the people alone. America's founders had a clean slate to write on. They could have set up an oligarchy. In fact, there were some who wanted George Washington to be their king. But the founding fathers knew history, and they chose to give us the rule of law in a republic, not the rule of a majority in a democracy. Why? Let's demonstrate the difference in the setting of the Old West. Consider a lynch mob in a democracy. 35 horseback riders chase one lone gunman. They catch him, and they vote 35-1 to hang him. Democracy has triumphed, and there's one less gunman to contend with. Now consider the same scenario in a republic. The 35 horseback riders catch the gunman and vote 35-1 to hang him, but the sheriff arrives, and he says, "You can't kill him. He's got his right to a fair trial." So they take the gunman back to town. A jury of his peers is selected, and they hear the evidence and the defense, and they decide if he shall hang. Does the jury even decide by majority rule? No, it has to be unanimous or he goes free. The rights of the gunman aren't subject to majority rule, but to the law. This is the essence of a republic. Many Americans would be surprised to learn that the word democracy does not appear in the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. Constitution, nor does it appear in any of the constitutions of the 50 states. The founders did everything they could to keep us from having a democracy. James Madison, rightly known as the father of the Constitution, wrote in essay number 10 of the Federalist Papers, "Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Alexander Hamilton agreed, and he stated, "We are a republican government. Real liberty is never found in despotism or in the extremes of democracy." Samuel Adams, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, stated, "Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself." The founders had good reason to look upon democracy with contempt, because they knew that the democracies in the early Greek city-states produced some of the wildest excesses of government imaginable. In every case, they ended up with mob rule, then anarchy, and finally tyranny under an oligarchy. During that period in Greece, there was a man named Solon, who urged creation of a fixed body of law not subject to majority whims. But where the Greeks never adopted Solon's wise counsel, the Romans did. Based on what they knew of Solon's laws, they created the 12 tables of the Roman law, and in effect built a republic that limited government power and left the people alone. Since government was limited, the people were free to produce, with the understanding that they could keep the fruits of their labor. In time, Rome became wealthy and the envy of the world. In the midst of plenty, however, the Roman people forgot what freedom entailed. They forgot that the essence of freedom is the proper limitation of government. When government power grows, people freedom recedes. Once the Romans dropped their guard, power-seeking politicians began to exceed the powers granted them in the Roman Constitution. Some learned that they could elect politicians who would use government power to take property from some and give it to others. Agriculture subsidies were introduced, followed by housing and welfare programs. Inevitably, taxes rose and controls over the private sector were imposed. Soon, a number of Rome's producers could no longer make ends meet, and they went on the dole. Productivity declined, shortages developed, and mobs began roaming the streets, demanding bread and circuses from the government. Many were induced to trade freedom for security. Eventually, the whole system came crashing down. They went from a republic to a democracy and ended up with an oligarchy under a progression of the Caesars. Thus, democracy itself is not a stable form of government. Instead, it is the gradual transition from limited government to the unlimited rule of an oligarchy. Knowing this, we as Americans are ultimately left with only two choices. We can keep our republic, as Franklin put it, or we will inevitably end up with an oligarchy, a tyranny of the elite.
As I said in the opening of the show, Barack Obama lied to the entire world when he said that Moammar Gadaffi was about to use chemical weapons on quote-unquote innocent protesters, who were anything but. They were Al-Qaeda terrorists. The American media pumped this into us for weeks prior to the intervention to get us used to it. Let's just take a look at a couple of these clips.
The leader, Moammar Gadaffi, has unleashed an army of hired killers on his own people. And there are new fears today he may resort to chemical weapons, not new today, but new in the last few days, as he struggles to stay in power. His former justice minister, who stepped down in protest, now warns that Gadaffi may use chemical weapons to try to crush the uprising.
Officials tell me one of their biggest concerns in Libya right now involves the stockpiling of chemical weapons by Muammar Gaddafi's regime. Our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr, has been investigating.
So what weapons are there? The number one concern, the 10 tons of the deadly blister agent mustard gas, which is stored in a facility located south of Tripoli, and other agents that could be used to make deadly sarin gas.
But the day after Gaddafi had been killed, doing my due diligence as an investigative reporter, I called NATO headquarters in Brussels, and I spoke to the on-duty official NATO spokesman for about 20 minutes. And he told me that Barack Obama's reason for intervention was a lie. And you're going to hear his, you're going to hear that interview in just a couple of minutes. But I'm going to take you back and show you what I uncovered about the illegal U.S. NATO intervention in Libya and the results that has caused a civil war in Libya, chaos, anarchy, with Libyan citizens fighting against Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who had tried to take over their government, and black guest workers that were being killed in a genocide that nobody reported. And missiles, 20,000 of them, that were stolen from Gaddafi's armory and sent by the U.S. government, by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and the CIA through Turkey to ISIS forces in Syria. You're not going to believe this, folks, but I guarantee it's all 100% true. Let's watch this. Welcome back to The Truth is Viral. My name is Bob Powell, and this week I'm going to take you on a very strange journey. It starts in Doha, Qatar, and ends in Tripoli, Libya. And let me tell you something, folks. Along the entire way, we've been lied to by every media outlet in the world, practically. If it's a mainstream media outlet, you can pretty much guarantee that they're lying on this one. Because, you know, it seems like they live in opposite land. Or maybe we do. Or maybe we're all living in George Orwell's novel 1984, where war is peace, and freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. So yeah, we've been sold a bill of goods. I've never been a big fan of Moammar Gadaffi, but what happened here was wrong. There was no popular revolution in Libya. By and large, the people of Libya had absolutely nothing to complain about. They had the highest standard of living in Africa, and with benefits including $500 a year that comes from oil revenue deposited directly into their bank accounts, a $50,000 gift to newlyweds, a free and compulsory education, equal rights for women and minorities, interest-free loans, free housing. I find it interesting to note here that Gaddafi swore that every Libyan would be housed before his own parents were. His father died before Gaddafi kept that promise, but he was finally able to move his mother into a new home because he had finally housed every other Libyan in the country. And those homes had free electricity. The people that lived in those homes benefited from free universal health care. If they wanted to be a farmer, well, you got a free farm and the seed to go along with it to start you off. And gasoline was 14 cents a gallon, and the government would pay for half the cost of your car. Under Moammar Gadaffi, the literacy rate rose from 10% to 90% during his term in office. In just one generation, he brought knowledge and literacy to an entire country. I don't care who you are. You've got to admire that. And then there's the universal health care. If there was something that wasn't available in Libya and a Libyan citizen needed to have a certain type of health care that wasn't available there, well, the government would ship you off to another country where that treatment was available and that they'd pay for it. There is no denying at least one very popular achievement of the Libyan government. The $33 billion GMMR, the Great Man-Made River Project, which brought water to the desert by building the largest and most expensive irrigation project in history. The GMMR provides 70% of the population with water for drinking and irrigation, and it literally made the desert bloom. Now, I don't know what he was doing, but obviously the man was doing something right, especially when you consider the fact that he was able to do all of this for his people on his own dime. That's right, Libya carried no foreign debt. He used his country's oil wealth to pay for everything and never paid a foreign bank a single penny in interest. The banksters didn't like that. We'll get to that later too. We were told before the Iraq War that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. We were told that we had to intervene or one day he was going to nuke one of our cities. Do you remember that? I remember.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Well, there were no weapons of mass destruction, were there?
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere.
Yeah, that President Bush, he just cracks me up. He's a real jolly joker, a real funny guy. I'll touch on that later too. So why did we go to war with Iraq? Bush knew that he was lying about the WMD, so he must have had another reason. I'm putting my money on two reasons. One of them was very personal.
After all, this is the guy that tried to kill my dad at one time.
Yeah, he not only wanted to kill the man that tried to kill his father, he wanted to protect the oil wealth that the Bush family had been building up for many, many years, too. Yeah, let's not forget about that. Now, back in 2000, Saddam Hussein had announced that he wanted to start selling his oil in euros instead of dollars, which is the standard currency for OPEC nations that sell their oil. Well, that's where the banksters come in. They just couldn't let that happen because every dollar that's printed comes from the Federal Reserve. Arab nations accept those dollars in payment for their oil, but where do you think that the money is redeposited? Where do the Arabs bank? That's right. They bank at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York.
The United States intervened secretly in 1973 when OPEC was evaluating this proposal to say, please don't do that. And they were talking to Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and say, why don't you sell these in dollars only? And they're working closely with the British on this. And we will, it's sort of a quid pro quo, we will protect you, we will sell you military arms, we'll keep you in power, as long as you keep selling oil in dollars. Even the CIA didn't know about it at first, neither did Congress. But after the fact, it was a fait accompli, it was done. So ever since then, for the last 31 years, the dollars that OPEC gets flows back to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. After the petrodollar recycling system was implemented, 70% of Saudi Arabia's entire wealth was in one account in the Federal Reserve of New York. And that implemented a system where we kept the Saudis in power, they got rich, and we had an unlimited credit card.
I've got to say it's a pretty slick scam that they've got going there. You know, Libya has been on the hit list of the powers that be for a long time. Let's listen to General Wesley Clark.
He said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office that says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. I said, 7 countries in 5 years. I said, is that a classified memo? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. He was about to show it to me. He said, because I want to talk about it.
Making the same mistake that Saddam made a decade ago, Gaddafi gave the banksters the excuse they were looking for. He told them to take their dollars and shove them where the sun doesn't shine. He announced that he would no longer accept dollars or even euros as payment for his country's oil. He wanted real gold. He wanted dinars in exchange for the black gold that he had. And with that, Gaddafi sealed his own fate. On February 23rd, special forces from 3 NATO nations arrived in Libya, France, Britain, and the United States. They began to arm and train these rebels that were based in Benghazi. Advanced forces from the Gulf Cooperation Council, consisting mainly of Qatari soldiers, set up shop in the Nafusa Mountains, Benghazi, and eventually Tripoli to train the rebels. But just who are these rebels? Well, they come from eastern Libya. That's where the revolution began, and it's been a hotbed for Al-Qaeda terrorists for years. Many of the terrorists from that region went abroad to wage jihad against the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan, only to come home to Libya to be jailed by Gaddafi for belonging to the LIGF, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, a terrorist group that Gaddafi had put down years earlier. At least he thought he had put them down. I guess he was mistaken. That's right, you heard me correctly. Moammar Gadaffi, the man that we've been told was a terrorist, all of these years was also an active partner in the war on terror. His jails were filled with Al-Qaeda terrorists, including these 2 men, Abdul Hakim Belhaj and Abdel Hakim al-Asidi. Al-Asidi was captured near Peshawar, Pakistan, where he was fighting coalition forces. After his capture, he was turned over to the U.S., where he spent time as a guest of the CIA before being turned over to the Libyans to rot in their jails for a while. Now, Belhaj is a little bit different. He's an old-school jihadist, a real OG. He fought alongside Osama bin Laden, along with scores of other fighters from the LIFG during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And that's how far back his Al-Qaeda ties go. He was also captured and held for a time in a secret prison, a special CIA prison in Malaysia, before he was sent to Libya to languish there as well. Belhaj and Al-Assidi were freed earlier this year along with 240 other Islamic militants at the exact same time that foreign intelligence operatives were landing in eastern Libya by Moammar Gadaffi's son Saif in an attempt at reconciliation.
Among them are leaders of the Al-Qaeda-linked Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. In total, 214 prisoners linked to militant groups were set free, in a key milestone for Libya's program of reconciliation with militants who killed dozens of soldiers and police in the 1990s.
So now that the commanders have been placed in the field, all they need are troops. Where better than to find a bunch of scumbag terrorists than a prison?
Well, remember this from Wednesday? Anti-Gaddafi rebels freed a prison in Tripoli. Today, CNN has learned that among those liberated, inmates are hundreds of men who are believed to be supporters of Al-Qaeda. They're now on the loose.
By now, the revolution was picking up steam, with a literal army of Al-Qaeda terrorists and supporters on the ground. However, the Libyan leader was successfully dealing with the uprising and was pushing the rebels back until March 19th, when NATO, in response to mainstream media allegations of atrocities being committed by the Gaddafi regime, began raining cruise missiles and laser-guided bombs down on the country. In the video we're watching now, a NATO cluster bomb munition hits an area densely populated by civilians. Cluster bombs near civilians? Really? What in the hell were you guys thinking? Whatever happened to precision munitions? Well, we'll get back to the tactics in this war in just a minute. Right now, I'd like to point out an oddity. What do you suppose would be a major priority for an insurgent force that's trying to overthrow a government? Securing weapons, maybe. Planning strategy. Pushing the fight forward? That's what I'd do. What would you say if I told you that one of the first things that these rebels did before NATO started helping them was to open up a central bank? That's right. The very same day that NATO got involved, and long before any victory was assured, these CIA and MI6 trained Al-Qaeda rebels opened up a central bank and a new national oil company. The supposed ragtag revolutionaries announced the formation of the Libyan Oil Company as supervisory authority on oil production and policies in the country, based temporarily in Benghazi, and the appointment of an interim director general of the company. The council also said it designated the Central Bank of Benghazi as a monetary authority competent in monetary policies in Libya, and the appointment of a governor to the Central Bank of Libya, with a temporary headquarters in Benghazi. Writing for the website economicpolicyjournal.com, economist Robert Wenzel stated, "Here's one for the Guinness Book of World Records. This suggests that we're having a bit more than a ragtag bunch of rebels running around, and that they have some pretty sophisticated influences. I have never before heard of a central bank being created in just a matter of weeks out of a popular uprising. This continues to look like a major oil and money play, with the true disaffected rebels being used as puppets and cover as the oil money and transfers take place." Now, by late June, the rebels were pushing down from the Nafusa Mountains to towns in the foothills, which was allowing them to gain control of the strategically important roadways that linked Tripoli with Tunisia, which was Gaddafi's main source of supplies. It's important to note here that those bases in the Nafusa Mountains were the staging area for the Qatari troops, who were part of the GCC contingent based out of Doha, along with troops from the United Arab Emirates. They had been training there alongside Al-Qaeda terrorists for months, with Qatari weapons brought in on fishing boats.
We believe France still supplies weapons to the rebels, and today the Libyan rebels, whom we captured in these two boats, admitted that the whole operation was carried out with the coordination between them, the Qatari army, and NATO ships in the Mediterranean Sea.
After several more months of NATO bombardment, Gaddafi's forces were surrounded by rebel forces and getting pounded from the air every time they tried to make a move. Finally, on October 20th, An 80-vehicle convoy carrying Moammar Gadaffi attempted to escape the city of Sirte, where he'd been holed up. They broke through the inner cordon of Al-Qaeda and Qatari troops, but before they could get away, the convoy was attacked by French fighter planes and a Predator drone that was being flown from Las Vegas, Nevada.
What we can certainly say to you is we didn't target the convoy believing Gadaffi was in it. There was a convoy of vehicles, military vehicles, maneuvering in the vicinity of Sirte, heading in a particular direction, with armed to the teeth, which was engaged by NATO aircraft yesterday. Okay, yesterday, 08:30 local time. Convoy one, there was a strike. Convoy was disrupted. A number of the vehicles heading off in a different direction. That was then struck again. It was disrupted. We then, obviously, at some delay, see the events that unfolded on the TV screens.
The whole world watched as the videos poured onto the internet. We watched as Moammar Gadaffi was dragged out of a drainage culvert. We watched as he was beaten. We watched as he was abused and even sodomized by his captors. He was paraded around on the hood of a truck like a 10-point buck on the last day of hunting season. He was dragged through the streets and beaten some more, and then he was murdered.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died. Did it have anything to do with your visit? No, oh, I'm sure it did.
I was watching one of the videos of Gaddafi's capture, where I saw a user had made mention of the fact that the rebels that surrounded Gaddafi, the ones that were ripping a now defenseless 70-year-old man to shreds, were wearing the uniforms of the Qatari army, whose camouflage pattern is distinct from the patterns of the other countries in the Middle East. I wondered what the hell Qatari troops were doing there in the first place. I thought this was a NATO operation. So what were GCC troops doing involved? I was curious to see if those really were Qatari troops, so I forwarded the video to a couple of people I know that live in the Middle East. They confirmed that the men were in fact wearing Qatari uniforms. That can be explained, I suppose, by the 18 plane loads worth of supplies that the Qataris had flown into the rebels. But the fact that they were speaking Arabic with a Qatari accent is a bit harder to reconcile with the fact that they were really rebels.
Who is the opposition that we're supporting? And make no mistake, there's a big question mark there. What we do know is we know there's a lot of speculation about who makes up the opposition. So that could be indicative of the fact that we just don't have any hard intelligence about it. We know for a fact that Al-Qaeda has been active in the eastern part of Libya for years, and they viewed Benghazi and other parts of eastern Libya as a very fertile recruiting ground. So we know that they've been active there. We know that Libyan fighters have been picked up on the battlefields, or killed on the battlefields, or otherwise identified on the battlefields of Iraq over the years. So it's not a big leap to go from that to say that Al-Qaeda, which is always very opportunistic,
sure,
and tends to love chaos,
yeah,
they're active there. But the big question becomes, how much of the opposition do they make up? How much of the opposition is made up of extremists?
So now I'll tie it all together. The U.S. Central Command is located in Doha, Qatar. That alone should speak volumes. After he was released from prison by Saif Gadaffi, guess who turned up at the Doha Libyan Contact Group as one of the participants who was to help chart Libya's future? If you guessed old school AQ terrorist Abdul Belhaj, close associate of Iraqi Al-Qaeda leader Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and a former guest of the CIA, then you have guessed correctly. Ding, ding, ding. He and his buddy Abdel Hakim al-Hasidi are now ranking members of the new Libyan National Transitional Council. That's right, the CIA is responsible for putting the worst possible scum in the world in charge of Libya. I can say that they are the worst possible scum with conviction, because I've seen the aftermath of their campaign of terror as they ravaged the Libyan landscape. And now you will too. If you have a weak stomach, then turn off the video. If you have children in the room, tell them to leave, because what's coming up next is disturbing. As they went terror-assing around Libya, these rebels have waged a brutal, racist campaign of genocide against black Libyans and black guest workers from other African countries. Not even light-skinned Libyans who have sheltered their black friends and neighbors are free from reprisals. The signature Al-Qaeda beheading is usually the price they pay for being black.
I'm Pete Santilli, and you're watching The Truth is Viral.
Do not click away. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
Not even children are immune to the atrocities being committed by these Al-Qaeda rebels. Well, I guess they're not rebels anymore. They're in charge of the government now. In a scene harking back to the Crusades, this young boy was impaled on a metal pole by the advancing Al-Qaeda terrorists. Let's just call them that. What his crime was, we'll never know. What the hell kind of people are these? Do we really want these people in charge of Libya? Look at what we've done. My God, I have never been so ashamed of my government as I am today. Moammar Gadaffi was no saint, but in his 41 years as the ruler of Libya, he never came close to the level of brutality that's been displayed since this fake revolution was started by the banksters and the CIA. Compared to what we've just witnessed, Gaddafi was right up there along with Mother Teresa and Gandhi. And with an Islamist government waiting in the wings, the future for ordinary Libyans is looking pretty doggone dim. You know, it's true that he was a thorn in the side of the West for years. But in recent years, Gaddafi had given up terrorism, and he had halted his WMD programs altogether.
Today in Tripoli, the leader of Libya, Colonel Moammar Gadaffi, publicly confirmed his commitment to disclose and dismantle all weapons of mass destruction programs in his country. He has agreed immediately and unconditionally to allow inspectors from international organizations to enter Libya.
Anymore, he was not much more than a minor annoyance.
Part of the issue with Gaddafi was he was very demonstrably drawing down his old WMD capability. Now that the raw materials were there, and those needed to be secured, but there was nothing weaponized because they'd very deliberately stopped that program and were kind of in the process of disposing of it all.
Yeah, Moammar Gadaffi was no saint, but neither was he the monster that the mainstream media has been portraying him as since last February. So who's going to protect the members of Gaddafi's tribe, the people that supported him, or the hundreds of thousands of black Libyans from the genocide that's being waged now by the new ruling class? I guess it doesn't matter now, because the banksters have their bank. So before I go throw up, I'm going to share one more clip with you. This video is of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and it was taken candidly. She didn't know that the camera was rolling. This is what she said at the moment it was confirmed that Moammar Gadaffi had been killed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died. Did it have anything?
She thinks this is funny. No real feeling human being would make jokes about a defenseless old man, regardless of what he'd done in the past, that's been shot in both legs so that he can't escape, then brutalized, sodomized, and beaten nearly to death until somebody mercifully offed him, one in the chest, one in the head. So yeah, it's been a horror in Libya for the last 6 years. Okay, but what's most important to us is that we watched 4 American heroes come home in flag-draped coffins. 3 of our brave operators and an American ambassador who died for a lie. They all died for a lie. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton spent our blood and treasure based on a lie so that they could continue running guns to Syria and install a Muslim Brotherhood government in Libya. Even Fox News reported on the gun running. Check this out.
In this Fox News exclusive, because documents are now revealing that U.S. intelligence agencies were fully aware that weapons were moving from the terror stronghold in Libya to Syria before the attack that killed the 4 Americans that you see at the center of our screen. The paper trail also contradicts President Obama's assertion that the rise of ISIS came as somewhat of a surprise to the administration. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge on this for us live in D.C. So, Catherine, what are we learning here about this?
Well, Martha, newly released documents show a serious disconnect between what the administration said and what was known as the Defense Intelligence Agency, also known as the DIA. This September 16, 2012 memo, copied to the National Security Council, State Department, CIA, and others, concluded the Benghazi terrorist attack was planned at least 10 or more days in advance. The DIA memo also reports the attack was tied to 9/11 and was retaliation for a June 2012 drone strike that killed an Al-Qaeda strategist. There is no discussion of a demonstration or an anti-Islam video. Quote, the intention was to attack the consulate and to kill as many Americans as possible, to seek revenge for the U.S. killing of Abu Yahya al-Libi in Pakistan, and in memorial of the 11 September 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center buildings. Judicial Watch obtained these new records by suing in federal court.
The Obama administration says it was a coincidence that it occurred on 9/11. In fact, their intelligence said it wasn't a coincidence, and in fact, specifically, the attack occurred because it was 9/11.
And another DIA memo from 2012 predicts the rise of ISIS and the establishment of a caliphate 17 months before the president called the terror group the JV Team, Martha.
There's been a lot of discussion about what our operatives were doing there at the time when this attack happened, and that there was discussion about moving weapons out of that very volatile area in Libya. What do we learn about that in here, Catherine?
Well, Martha, another DIA memo dated October 5th, 2012, leaves no doubt that U.S. intelligence agencies were clearly aware that lethal weapons were being shipped to Syria via the port of Benghazi. In a recent interview with Bret Baier, the former acting CIA director skirted the topic.
Were CIA officers tracking the movement of weapons from Libya to Syria?
Can't talk about that.
Can't talk about it.
Can't talk about it.
Even if they weren't moving the weapons themselves, are you saying categorically that the U.S. government and the CIA played no role whatsoever in the movement of weapons from Libya to Syria?
Yes, we played no role. Now, whether we were watching other people do it, I can't talk about it.
The DIA memo also reported that military stockpiles were moving from Benghazi to the Syrian ports of Banaus and Bor Islam, and the shipments included rifles, RPGs, and missiles. This DIA document may also be problematic for Mrs. Clinton, who also skirted the weapons issue during her only congressional testimony on Benghazi of January 2013, Martha.
Yeah, we remember that interesting exchange. Catherine, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You're watching the Anti-Marxist Marathon hosted by Peter T. Santilli, and for the moment, yours truly, on the Liberty One television network. We're going to be broadcasting for the next couple of days, and we're going to bring you knowledge, folks, because we want you to have the power to be able to defend our republic from those that would take it away from you. And before I go, I just want to say a little thing, okay? While the American people were suffering from normalcy bias, caused by the pablum and the lies served up by the mainstream media, criminals took control of our country. They used their unlimited power to enrich themselves, using the United States military as the instrument of that power. their sycophants, and their minions infest all of our governmental institutions. Some people call them the deep state. Now, I'm not anti-government. I'm not anti-cop. I'm anti-corruption. The people that we elect and hire to serve us owe us a debt. They take an oath as a member of our government, as a police officer, and as other first responders to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. As we've seen in Washington, D.C. with the firings and demotions and desertions of more than a dozen top government officials, criminal referrals for Andrew McCabe. One's coming up for Peter Strzok, I can guarantee you that. We've got a real problem. And they're silencing our voices because they don't want the American people at large to know about this problem. They want them to keep on going on thinking that everything's okay. Well, it's not okay. Thankfully, you've got people like me and Pete Santilli and all the other hosts on the Liberty One Network watching the walls for you. And this is where you need to come to get your real news, because you're not going to hear it in the mainstream media. You're not even going to hear it necessarily on Fox News, because they lie too. I'm a credentialed journalist. I went to college. I've got a diploma in everything. I was a mainstream media journalist for the first part of my career. And the truth means a lot to me. For one, Revelation 21:8 says that all liars are going to hell. I'm doing this to save lives and win souls for Jesus Christ in these very last days. I'm not about lying. The truth will set you free, folks. And Liberty One is the only place where you're going to find it. And we're going to continue broadcasting all weekend long. They might be able to screw with our broadcast. I noticed that the feed went down a couple of times. That's okay. We'll still get the signal out. You need to like, comment, and share these videos and spread them to all your friends. And I need to get out of here because Jermaine Bozzio is coming up. He is one funny dude. If you haven't watched his show, please do. I was watching him night before last, and I was just cracking up. He's a really awesome political commentator and a really nice guy. So I'd like to thank you for watching The Truth is Viral on Liberty One Network. We're going to be broadcasting all weekend long. I think I'm coming back on at midnight tonight. So I'll see you later. Thank you for watching. As always, God bless. Semper Fi, and Hoorah. Jermaine Bozzio's up next.
Thank you for watching The Truth is Viral with your host, Bobby Powell. Make sure to follow The Apocalypse on Twitter at The Truth is Viral. Like The Truth is Viral on Facebook, and if you can, please remember to donate to the cause via PayPal at www.bobpowell.blogspot.com.